Oh, right. Anyway, if you come up to do something, you ought to come and see us here, and you'll have to look through our archives and things.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Royal Photographic Society's Historical Group. It's my pleasure to introduce Gilly Read, the chair of the group, who will introduce our speaker today and take it from there. Gilly, over to you.
Okay, today we're at the John Rylands Library with Anne Anderton, and thank you very much for doing this for us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the John Rylands, first of all, and then introduce Anne properly. The John Rylands Library is housed in a striking neo-Gothic building on Deansgate in Manchester. When walking down the road towards it, you could be forgiven for mistaking it for a cathedral. It was founded by Henrietta, wonderful name, Rylands, as a memorial to her husband, John Rylands, who was a prominent businessman and mill owner in Manchester. The library was opened to the public in 1900 and is today part of Manchester University. Originally, Henrietta wanted it to be a library for religious books, but after she purchased two notable collections, it diversified. Today, it houses a wide variety of books and manuscripts. The special collections, believed to be the largest in the United Kingdom, include medieval illuminated manuscripts and a Gutenberg Bible. A large collection of printing by William Caxton and the Rylands Library Papyrus, which is thought to be the earliest extant New Testament text. The library also holds personal papers and notable figures such as John Dalton, John Wesley, and Elizabeth Gaskell. The photographic collection was started in 2010-2011 by Stella Halkyar, who was the joint head of special collections until she retired. It was thanks to her that the visual collections were established as a separate collecting area at the Rylands Library. Photography is by far the biggest now and is steadily growing. Our speaker tonight is Anne Anderton, who is the curator of Western manuscripts and visual collections at the John Rylands Library. And this wide remit includes the care of the Rylands Library photographic collections, which are far-reaching in themselves. Anne has an MA in Modernist Literature and a professional qualification in Library and Information Studies. She has worked in various roles for the John Rylands Library, University of Manchester, since 2002. Her areas of interest are teaching and learning, using special collections and resources, manuscript studies and early photographic techniques. She also has experience in heritage digitization. She has produced an online catalogue and collection level description of the Rylands Victorian British photography collection and assists in promoting the collection. The Historical Group visited the John Rylands Library in 2019. It was a splendid visit and showed us a variety of images and books from the collection. And it is some of these that she will highlight in her talk to us now. So I'll just ask you a few questions, Anne, if you don't mind, to kick off. So welcome and thank you very much for doing this for us. I know it's a very, very busy time, what with the COVID and having to do everything online. But it has helped us a bit because we have this splendid studio that you're talking to us from.
Yes. Do you want me to sort of explain a little bit about where we are? So this is the Christie Room in the John Rylands Library, and we have adapted it over the last 6 months plus to enable teaching and learning to still be facilitated from within the John Rylands Library with our special collections. And so we have 3 cameras set up in this room, which will hopefully make this quite a seamless presentation, fingers crossed. Yeah.
Yes, that's marvellous. I mean, this is by far the most elaborate setup we've ever had on one of these talks. It's very good. Well, I'll ask you, what did you do when you left university? I mean, how did you get into curating?
Yeah, I actually went straight into working in libraries, but it was a public library. And I did the kind of usual library assistant kind of jobs, and an opportunity came up to work in the archives and local studies of that particular library. And that is where my interest in some of the more historic and special collections was kind of began, I suppose. I then kind of moved around a bit, and I did a PGCE and thought that I might teach, and did the MA that you mentioned, but I very much enjoyed working in the library environment, and a job came up working here in the John Rylands again, just on the counter services. And so I was lucky enough to get that part-time, and I've never left. And worked in various roles within the library, gaining my professional qualification whilst I was working here. And it is just a pleasure and in fact an honour to work with the material that's in this library. It is just astonishing, and every week there's something new that you discover about the place and the collections that we have here. So it's absolutely wonderful.
It is an incredible place. I have to admit, very embarrassingly, that I didn't really know much about the John Rylands until our group came on a visit to see you.
It's kind of, there's a lot of people here in Manchester, when you ask them, haven't been in yet, and they should come in, obviously, when we're properly back open to the public.
Yes, well, it is a public library, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's part of the university, but we have always been open to the public. The public can come and register with us as readers, and yes, we would make material available to anybody who had an interest in it within our reading rooms.
Yeah, Chetham's is also a public library, isn't it? Surprisingly.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Oh, what sort of courses do you teach for the undergraduates, or is it undergraduates, or is it at father level?
It's a mix, actually. So we do undergraduate and postgraduate courses. We run a very well-established MA here, which is on the history of the book and reading the Middle Ages, which is more paleography focused. And so with my manuscripts hat on, I tend to be involved with quite a lot of those sessions. We also work with history of art students very regularly. So again, that would be sometimes with manuscript material, looking at medieval art and art history, but also with our more contemporary collections and photographic collections as well. And we work with sociology students as well. When I talk about some of the later objects that we get out, the photo jewellery, which is one of the things that I'm going to speak about later, those are items that we very regularly get out in our sociology sessions, and I'll explain the kind of things that we talk about later on in the presentation. So there's a real range of students, and they are always very, very interesting sessions. The students are always really very interested in the material that we have, and I think it's a really good way of introducing, especially undergraduates, to proper hands-on, primary research with this material that is very much more encouraged these days. To come and to really look and see what's available for you, to study and to research. So it's very worthwhile.
Yes. What direction do you think the collection will be taking, the collection of photographs will be taking in the future?
That's an interesting question. We have very strong historic representation here within our collections, but we are continuing to collect not only historic materials, but more contemporary artists and photographers. And so we've got a really good balance at the moment, and we have to have an eye on constantly collecting what will be the historical material of the future. Some of the most recent acquisitions that I have made is around 90s photographs of Manchester, so various kind of social documentary material, which is just wonderful. Richard Davis is one of the photographers that we have collected material from, and there's many others that we kind of have in our sites to kind of boost those collections. So it isn't just the historical material. We want to really establish this as a collection that is looking forward as well as backwards.
Yes, very good. Well, I think now you better leave me and get on with your talk. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So if people will forgive me, I'll just kind of reiterate how we have got to where we have with the collections at the moment. And as Gilly was saying, really the visual collections as a discrete collecting area, which I think is perhaps a rare thing within some libraries, is all credit to Stella Halkyard, who was my predecessor in terms of looking after the collections, although, as Gilly also said, she was actually joint head of special collections here. And she had a really beautiful way of describing the visual collections as being an unconscious of whatever present element of the materials that we were very consciously collecting. And so, as you were mentioning earlier, we began by collecting printed materials and manuscripts, and then as we moved into the 1920s and beyond, archival material. But those visual collections and indeed photography was part of all of those collections. And so archive collections would very often have photographic material. They would have objects that are relating to personal objects relating to people. We would have printed volumes that had early photographs illustrating them. And of course, as I've mentioned, we have beautiful medieval manuscripts which have illumination and illustration. So those visual materials were always there. It's just that we weren't really paying attention to them in the way that we probably should. And so the first thing that Stella and my colleague Claire Baker, wonderful Claire, who still works here with me now, is to begin to assess the collections that we did have already, to begin to document some of the material that we felt should be flagged, to pull areas of photographic material together. And now we're kind of at the stage where we've documented some of that material. And as I just mentioned it in the kind of questions, to consolidate those collections by actually purchasing and acquiring more material so that we're building up those collections for the future. We are still in the process of sorting and documenting, because in terms of a collection area, the other collections have a sort of centuries collection management behind them, and we've only been operating really in the last 10 years or so. So we're still in our infancy really compared to the other collections, but we are very much making sense of them. But what has happened is something very lovely actually, is that other curators and people who look after collections here in the library have become very much more aware and invested in what we're doing too. So for example, they will flag within their collection areas where they think there may be photographic material, for example, or object material that we would look at and consider taking in collections that might have art material or visual, what we would call visual collections. And I'll elaborate on what we call our visual collections in a moment, into the library, because they realise that we are interested in keeping that together, for example, with an archive that might be being acquired, whereas in the past it might have been directed to a museum or to an art gallery and split up, but we really want to keep that material together. So the visual collections, as we define them, has four main areas. So we have our photography, fine art, decorative art, and objects. And as again you mentioned in your lovely introduction, photography is by far our biggest area. And in 2015, around 2015, we did have the British Victorian cataloguing project, which was funded by the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art. And that was where we really started to try and make catalogues available to the public. We've also contributed to various exhibitions across Manchester as well. So we're getting ourselves out there in terms of exhibiting, because the Rylands isn't necessarily the easiest place to put on a photography exhibition, but there are other venues across Manchester, such as the Whitworth and the Manchester City Art Gallery, where we have been able to input into some of those photographic collections into a recent Martin Parr and Lee Wan Chia exhibitions. We hold photographic material of both those practitioners. So, you know, we're starting to get our material out there as well. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. And I have chosen cheekily 4 items, but the last 2 are part of the same kind of set of materials. So I hope you'll forgive me kind of sneaking an extra item in. So I have Scarti da Cotone, apologies for the appalling Italian pronunciation, or cotton waste, as we would call it, which is an Italian copy, obviously, of cotton waste. It is illustrated by Alvin, Langdon, Coburn, and I will talk about Coburn when we look at the object. I have a separate print of Gilly and Margaret Cameron, print, which I have here ready to show you, and 2 examples of photo jewellery. So I'm going to share the screen with you. Flip to the other camera. And we'll begin with Scarti di Cotone. Okay. So the reason that I've chosen this item really is to represent not just it as an object, but to represent a collection area. So we were very lucky recently to have put on deposit with us here at the library a wonderful collection of Alvin, Langdon, Coburn material from a private collector, and we're very honoured to be taking care of and making available this collection for researchers. For people who maybe haven't come across Coburn, Alvin Langdon Coburn was an American-born but then British-based photographer, photo pioneer, and maker of the first consciously abstract photographs in the history of photography, and he was part of a group known as American Pictorialism. Coburn had strong links with the northwest of England. He actually lived in North Wales, and he worked on a number of publications relating to the Manchester cotton industry. So this is one of those examples, cotton waste. I will open the volume, take us first to past this beautiful tipped in frontispiece, just to this page here. And so just to explain sort of what this volume is and the date and how it came about. So cotton waste was actually privately printed and published on behalf of William C. Jones, Collyhurst Waste Mills, Manchester, by Charles W. Hobson in 1920. And it seems as though it was simultaneously published in multiple languages. So there's an English language version, German, French, and Italian. There is a German and an English language version in the Coburn collection that we have here. And this one is a very recent acquisition and addition to the collection, which is the Italian version. And the Italian and the French versions are relatively unknown within institutions. And so this really is a rare addition. A colleague of mine has a really good phrase for things that are super rare, like hen's teeth. So this is like hen's teeth, the Italian version of Scarti di Cotone. Charles W. Hobson, who is mentioned here, actually went on to found the Cloister Press here in Manchester in 1921. And Coburn worked with the Cloister Press over a number of years through the 1920s. But he then, Hobson, went on to found another press in London called the Foundry Press. And he worked with a gentleman called Ingham. And what is also very nice about this, and you will again have to bear with me as I flick back through very carefully, is that we actually have a pencil inscription. Just see if I can make that a little bit clearer. On the front, and it is J. Ingham from his son Ernest Ingham, who was the managing director of the... That doesn't look like what I was expecting it to say. The Fanfare Press, yes, it is the Fanfare Press, isn't it? Yeah, in London. So not only does this have, you know, be quite rare in itself as being an Italian version, we have that nice little element of provenance that actually ties it to Manchester, the Cloister Press and the Fanfare Press. I've momentarily thought it can't be called the Fanfare Press, but it is called the Fanfare Press. So to the actual illustrations by Coburn. And so they appear as we move through the volume towards the back, and they are all photogravures. I will pull that back so that people can see. Okay, so the photogravure, I mean, people in this group will probably be aware, but I'll just explain that it's actually a kind of photomechanical process rather than a straightforward photographic process. What we get are these kind of magical, almost fairy tale, ethereal, gauzy images, which actually make what is quite mundane and pedestrian work look absolutely beautiful. Some of these people may be familiar with, you may have seen some of these images, but they really are exquisite. I just love the way that they definitely show what is going on. They chronicle a really important point in Manchester's industrial history, but make it art, I suppose is the way that I feel about it. They're just so artistically presented, so beautiful, and just absolutely amazing. I'll just pull it through to perhaps what is one of the most famous images that people might recognise, which is this one. Manchester has never looked so artful and beautiful. And the Coburn material, we have a lot of the Manchester material, but we also have some early glass plates of Coburn's. It really is a collection that we want people to work on. We already have researchers interested at Manchester because of the Manchester connection. And so we are really hoping that people start to take note of this material that we have here. So I'm conscious of time. So that's Scarti di Cottone. And I'm going to flip the camera to this other item and unveil it. So if you just bear with me a second, I have this covered up simply to keep as much light off it as possible. Okay, and I will zoom into this item so that we can see it a little bit more clearly. So we're going back further chronologically with this one. This is 1874, and it is this beautiful print by Julia Margaret Cameron. Chosen because it is beautiful, it really is one of my favourites, but also representative of a woman photographer. Some of our earlier material, you know, we don't have very many examples of women photographers, and this is a real corker, to be honest. In her lifetime, again, I don't think there's many people who won't have heard of Cameron, but she was criticised for her unconventional techniques, but also appreciated for the beauty of the compositions that she produced and her conviction that photography was an art form. Her photographs often had that Arthurian or legendary heroic sort of themes, and they very often featured famous sitters and members of her family. And this is a family portrait, which I'll explain in a moment. I also think that Cameron sits quite comfortably with the pre-Raphaelites, and we have a lot of pre-Raphaelite material in Manchester, so I think that she sits very comfortably alongside that kind of material. We have Holman Hunt paintings, Holman Hunt archives, we have the Ford Maddox murals in the town hall. Manchester has quite a lot of nice connection with the pre-Raphaelites, and I think that she sits nicely in our collections alongside that material. I'm just going to zoom in so that we can see a little bit more, because there are a couple of things that I will point out. So I will sharpen up the focus as much as I can. There we go. I think that's probably about as good as there we go. Probably about as good as I'm going to get it. So it's a Tondo albumen print from 1874, and it's a portrait of Gilly and Margaret Cameron's grandchildren, and it's Margaret and Adeline Norman. The two girls are seated with their heads close together. Margaret is the one with her gaze directed towards the floor, and Adeline is looking off into the distance with her head tipped towards her sister's shoulder. And the photograph was actually made shortly after the death of Julia Margaret Cameron's only daughter, Julia Norman, in childbirth. And it really, to me, does speak of a sense of bereavement and grief, and, you know, the two children perhaps coming together to support one another. I think it's an absolutely beautiful portrait. The children have this kind of almost Mater Dolorosa look about them, and it is just absolutely beautiful. The backstory aside, one of the things that I also find very interesting about Cameron, and I don't think that I can get close enough to show you, but I am just going to sort of lean forward and point out where it is that we have underneath here, along the bottom, a copyright statement, and it's signed from life, copyright of Gilly Margaret Cameron. And I always think it's so wonderful that she was so, far-sighted, and, you know, she wanted to sign her work like any artist would, really. But the copyright, I find very kind of clued in at the time. So I think she's, absolutely amazing. And it is just a beautiful work. Unfortunately, it is the only Cameron work that we have. I would love to buy some more, but having one is, enough. Let's not be greedy. I will just cover this up again to protect it from the light. And I am going to flip back. Hope I'm not making people dizzy, flipping things around.
No.
To this other camera. I'll just move Scati de Cotone gently out of the way. And I'm going to move from two items that had either explicit or implicit kind of sort of connections to Manchester, to these items that have no connection to Manchester at all, but they have that universal kind of appeal of being images of loved ones. So our photo jewellery always is very well received. We have an upcoming talk by my colleague Tony Richards and Angie McCarthy. They're going to do a little live Eventbrite talk on our photo jewellery, and it has been really well subscribed, over 100 people. They had to actually up the numbers because there were that many people interested in it. And these items were bought as a set. There was a good number of them. I'm only going to sort of look at two today because I know that we don't have a lot of time to go into too much detail. But they were bought in 2014, unknown in terms of provenance, not as far as we know connected to each other in any way, but just examples of photo jewellery. And I did mention a little bit earlier that we use these quite a lot in teaching, and we use them in our sociology classes. And what we talk about with the sociology classes is the life cycle of objects. And so, the change in meaning from items like these, which as we look at them, we will see must have been at one time cherished objects, to being displaced, being kind of disconnected from their original families, perhaps, and now kind of have come back into a new phase of their life cycle as historical artifacts to be studied by people. I don't think that there is anything new in the way that we connect to things like this, from the miniature portraits that were painted through to images that we carry around now on our mobile phones. We have this kind of, we have this urge to connect with people and to have visual representations of them. So I'm going to first look at this item here, which is the gold locket. And we've gone back even further chronologically because both these items are kind of circa 1860. And this first item is a beautiful locket, which I am not sure. I'm going to zoom down a bit more. I'm not sure you'll be able to make it out, but it's actually engraved with the words mother. And inside, we have 4 portraits. So if I turn it this way first, we have a gentleman here. Try and turn him the right way up. So there is, we think, Dad.
Mother.
Mother.
Yeah.
She's got a crack in, unfortunately. And father and mother are ambrotypes.
No.
So these are from around the 1860s onwards, photographed on glass plates, produced through the wet plate collodion process, and made into a positive image by then mounting them on black. But interestingly, what looks to be the sun, oops, now, wait a minute, you have to forgive me, I'm sort of working the opposite way when I'm showing them. We have a young man and we have a young lady. Let me see if I can get the right way up.
Yeah, she is.
There we go. And they
Children
are actually daguerreotypes, which is a slightly more expensive process. One of the earliest photographic processes named after Louis Daguerre. Again, as most of the people watching this, I'm sure will know that. But what I really enjoy about this is that obviously Mum and Dad have gone for the cheaper ambrotype, and son and daughter have gone for the more expensive. They have been given the option to have the more expensive daguerreotype, which I think is a very classic parent thing to do. We'll get the kids done as daguerreotypes and we'll have the cheaper option. And so it's obviously been something put together with love. It's an engraved mother, and this has almost certainly been worn and cherished by someone, but now unfortunately completely disassociated from that family. But we want to show it some love. We want to kind of get people interested in how people connect through images, and so it is one of the things that we get out quite regularly.
Lovely.
Moving on to the next one is, and again, this I'm going to hold it up to the camera in a moment, just so that you can see this a little better, because it isn't actually representing that well on this camera. We do have this image digitized, so I can also send links to a very much better image of this. But this is an example of mourning jewellery, and I think mourning and loss was something that definitely influenced the popularity of photo jewellery. The concept of memento mori, remember that you have to die, was quite well developed in the Victorian period with a complex visual symbolism. And so we know that this is likely a mourning piece because of what appears on the back. So if I begin with the front, it is a locket. Again, it is a little bit cracked. You can perhaps just make out some of that kind of damage there. And it's a very little girl with looks to be a ball in her hands. And it is an ambrotype again. But if we turn it over, we see that on the back we have a kind of pink water silk, but on top of that pink water silk, we have an urn, we have a broken tree, we have a torch that is spluttering out. And so all these symbols are actually indicative that this is a piece of mourning jewellery, and the blasted tree that hasn't come to its fruition, the torch that is going out, and the urn with the little kind of putty there. Just move it further this way. Unfortunately tells us that this little girl likely passed away at a young age. It was obviously cherished, worn probably very close to the parent's heart. So it's a sad little piece, but it is one of those that, you know, we get immediate kind of connection from the people that see it. I think we can all kind of understand that need to kind of try and keep our loved ones close. And so, yeah, we really do like our photo jewellery here. I'd like to get some more, but there's always more things that we would like to get. I'm going to come back, stop sharing the screen, and just pull it back to me in the room. So what I suppose I'm hoping to have shown you through this little presentation is not only a taste of some of the collections that we have and explain what we're doing here, but to try and demonstrate that we do want researchers, curators, students, tutors to be using this material. And what is really wonderful is that has started to happen. As I said, we've been part of exhibitions citywide. We have people using this material in teaching and learning. We have researchers working on pockets of our photographic material. And so I think the future is really healthy. I think there's an upsurgence in interest in both material and visual culture. And we hope to be here for a long time to help facilitate people's access to more and more of that material here in the Northwest and beyond.
Thank you so much for that, Anne. I'm just going to jump in here because we've got some questions in advance for you.
Okay.
Two harder ones and then a nice question, I think.
Okay.
You'll enjoy. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how people can see the collections if they're not in Manchester or not able to get there very easily, because we're all very connected these days. So perhaps you could just talk to that for a minute or so.
Absolutely, yeah. The first thing with the photography collections that we're very aware of is actually finding out the material that we have. Some of our collections are catalogued, and some of them we have entries in what we call our guide special collections. So for example, the Alvin Langdon Coburn material has an entry in our guide special collections. If people are really struggling, there are two things that they can do, and I will move on to accessing it in a second. You can contact us here at the library. I am contactable. It's part of my job, definitely, to try and help to facilitate access to this material. We do have some material digitized. This tends to be our older, less problematic in terms of copyright material, and so we are constantly adding to those collections. We have here something called the Manchester Digital Collections, and we have photographic collections within those collections. So we're actually quite visible within those digital collections. In terms of accessing things remotely, we have started to open as a library, so people who were relatively local can come and access material. We're hoping that will continue. But what I think is very interesting is that due to the recent circumstances, we have made great strides in being able to provide remote access to material. And so even though we have just begun to open up again, we have what we call visualizer appointments, which are sometimes using a visualizer up in the reading room, or even indeed from this studio here. And hopefully people will see that it's actually quite a good way of viewing that material. And so I cannot see that we would stop offering this kind of appointment to be able to view material. So hopefully there is kind of scope for people who aren't physically here in Manchester to see material, and we're just going to keep plugging away, adding as much digitally as we can as we go along.
Wonderful,
so
thank you.
Yeah.
And then the next question we have, that you've got some rather very special and rather wonderful historical collections. And I just wondered if you could talk, are you collecting contemporary work, or are you commissioning contemporary photographers perhaps to add to the collection?
That's interesting. I haven't actually got to the point where I have commissioned any work around Manchester. But we have very much started to try and investigate photographic activity that is going on around Manchester and photographers. Actually, last year, just before everything shut down, we were starting to get to a place where there seemed to be an explosion here in Manchester of excellent sort of social documentary around things like 90s dance culture and social documentary. And so we were really getting excited about some of the exhibitions that were being shown around Manchester, and we have definitely made strides to contact people from those exhibitions. We've already purchased material, I mentioned him before, from a photographer called Richard Davis, and I'm hoping to perhaps collect some more work from Richard around football grounds in the northwest. And so we really are trying to continue, as I said before, to add. But commissioning is something that, is a very interesting thing. I will have to digest that and think and think on that, because, as I said before, we want to constantly reassess historical collections through our new collections, but we also are aware that these will be the historical collections of the future. So we are open, very much open to that. It's only space that is stopping us.
That's good to hear. And then finally, if you could only take 3 objects home and live with them forever, which would you choose from the photography collections?
From the photography collections. Oh gosh, I definitely have Julia Margaret Cameron. I don't think I'd be able, in good conscience, to put her on the wall. It's too precious, which is just an awful thing to say, but I absolutely adore that. We have some wonderful Martin Parr photographs of Yeats's wine lodges in the 1980s, which I was a child in the 80s. I wasn't frequenting Yeats's wine lodges, but it does speak to me of a kind of culture that is very familiar. And so I think I would have to pick one of Martin Parr's items. And oh gosh, let me think. It is so hard. There is so much wonderful material. Perhaps a Lee Wan Chia print, who again is another one of our contemporary, not just photographic collections. Lee Wan Chia was a mixed media artist, but he did some really beautiful hand-coloured photographs, which are stunning, and so possibly one of the Lewantia prints, but it is very, very difficult, very difficult. We yeah, I will come away and I'll think, oh no, I'd rather take. So the list goes on, but I will stick with those three for now.
That sounds like perfect choices. It's one of those impossible questions, you know. But thank you for answering it so fully. I'm going to hand back to Gilly now.
Well, thank you, Michael. That was an amazing talk. It was wonderful. I have to say, I had no idea that Alvin, Langdon, Coburn had done that sort of photography. I've always thought of him as linked ring and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, very interesting character, and you know, ended, you know, he was so prodigious and so well known as a young photographer, and sort of almost really kind of stopped with that output as he got older and into more. He was very into kind of spiritual societies and philosophy, and you know, he sort of seemed to move away from his photography in a way, not away from his career, but in you know, being as prolific and producing more. But he is a fascinating character, and the link to Manchester is something that I think is worth exploring for researchers going forward. So yeah, it's wonderful. We're very happy to have this material, and yeah, beautiful work. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's rather a quick introduction to things, but yeah, just people be aware that we have material, and feel free to contact us if there's any questions that people have.
It's a very, very, very varied collection, isn't it?
It is, and that is what is so wonderful. But it's difficult to get on top of all this material because, as I said, we've got the historic. By historic, I guess I mean the legacy material that we have through the collections to try to document and make accessible, and all the while we've got new material coming in because we're consciously collecting now, and so. We do it as fast as we can. is the kind of answer. Obviously, everything has been kind of slightly thrown by the situation that everybody has experienced over the last year. But as we are all sat here now, we adapt, don't we? And we kind of carry on. And so, yeah.
It has meant that when we're doing things like this, more people actually see things than they did before.
Yes.
And they will latch onto these online things and look at things. So, you know, there are some advantages that have been because of the COVID.
Definitely.
It may seem.
Definitely.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Thank you, Anne, so much for sharing that with us earlier in the year, and it's been great to have the opportunity to play it out again. So, and thank you for joining us live now. We've got several questions that are coming through.
Okay.
And the first one I've got, which came to me directly, was just on the Scarti di Cottoni book. Can you just say a little bit about what that book was, why it was produced and what it was produced for? Was it advertising? Was it just a document? Was it a vanity project? Do you know anything more about it?
Do you know, I haven't really considered, can you hear me, by the way? Yes, you can, yeah. I haven't really considered the purpose, other than I think it must have been a publicity for the company that had commissioned it, and so it was completely privately printed, circulated, but it's also, I think, a celebration of the industry and what was happening at the time in Manchester. It's a very interesting choice, though, to engage somebody like Coburn to take those images. I think I find it fascinating that as if you want to think of it as some sort of brochure or publicity for the company, then such a kind of almost wild card thing to do, to get someone as kind of artistic, I suppose, as Coburn to do it. And I just think what results is just a fascinating item. And again, to publish it in multiple languages, there was obviously a real ambition there to share this with people. But I'm not an expert on Coburn. I can't quite hand on heart say that is what it was for, but it seems to me as though it was used to publicize the company in that way. So yes.
Thanks, Anne. We've got a question from John Walmsley, who's saying that he loves the John Rylands Library and has been round it several times. He says that Manchester University students can use the materials for research, but can outside students and researchers also use it?
Absolutely. In that way that we were mentioning, that we've always been a public library. So even though we are the John Rylands Research Institute and Library now, we've changed our name slightly, and there are a lot of academics who use us, but anybody can register with our library online, and it is all online now. If you look at the library pages, you will find links to a registration form. You can register, you can then request material to come and view and use our reading room. Yes, so absolutely anyone can join the John Rylands Library.
Great, wonderful, thank you. We've got two very specific questions from Alan Hodgson. One of them might be a bit too specific, so I may need to introduce you afterwards, but Alan's asked, saying that he's interested in the work of groups of two Manchester physics academics, Schuster and Rutherford, in around 1910. Are you likely to have any images or notebooks in the library?
We definitely have Arthur Schuster papers, and I'm fairly certain that there's probably photographs within that. We don't have an equivalent Rutherford collection, but I believe that there is correspondence within the Schuster papers with Rutherford, and some of the letters within other university collections. So essentially these come under our university archives. I can, if you send those questions to me, I can put the inquirer in contact with the curator, who would be able to help with that. And that is something that is, I guess, worth mentioning. Even though we are recognising the importance of photographic material within archives that we already have, we're not necessarily seeking to remove those prints and negatives from those collections. We just want to be able to flag where they exist. And so there is always going to be this kind of crossover of different curators that you would perhaps deal with to kind of access that material. But we definitely have Schuster material and a little bit of Rutherford material in there.
Okay, well, Alan's follow-up question then is around the Earl of Crawford, who was the director of the Britannia Works Company, which became Ilford Limited up to 1900. And he's asking whether your Crawford collection includes any of his personal papers from this photographic connection.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, we have Crawford material, but our Crawford material is around how the Crawford manuscripts came into our collections. I think a lot of personal papers are still with families, perhaps. But again, if you can send that question on to me, I can certainly try and unpick whether we do have anything. But off the top of my head, I think less likely than the Schuster and the Rutherford material to be able to help with.
I'll introduce Alan to you outside of the meeting.
Okay.
So, I think that's all the questions that we've had come in. Gilly, can I hand back to you?
Oh, right. Oh, yes, that was rather marvellous for the whole thing. It was very, very good. I'd forgotten an awful lot of what we'd done, but it was extremely good. And thank you very, very much. I was just quick wondering, do you have any Shirley Baker pictures?
Do you know, literally a couple of months ago, we purchased our first set of Baker images, and yes, I'm sort of ashamed to say we didn't have any in the collection prior to that, but they are beautiful. I'm very excited about them, and yes, I would like to get some more. Yeah, just 3, but this is the way that we work. We start with a few, then we build up and we build up and we build up. So yes, I can usually find something to kind of start collecting. Yes, so yes, we do, short answer, but they haven't been catalogued yet. They're so brand new. They're still with our conservators, who are giving them a little bit of tender loving care, and then we will make those available in our catalogue. Yes.
Good. Anyway, thank you very, very much.
You are absolutely welcome. It was a pleasure to record the actual talk and to kind of sit here, as you say, and listen to it a good few months later. Yeah, as Michael was saying, if people do have questions that they want to kind of send on to me, or if you can share my contact details with anyone who is interested. It's literally my job to try and help people find stuff. So there we go.
Yes, it was lovely to see it again. I'd forgotten, well, not forgotten it, but it's just lovely to recap it all.
Yes, very much so, very much so.
Thanks, Anne. I should just add that Tony's talk on which you mentioned was actually held a few months ago now. I don't know if that was recorded, but it may be available on the Rylands website.
I think it may be, and yeah, people might be interested because there are differing opinions certainly over the photo jewellery, for example, from someone like my colleague and friend Tony Richards, who is an actual practitioner rather than sort of me coming at it from a completely different angle. So yes, if you are interested, that would be something to look up as well. But I think they did record it. I would be sure that they were going to make it available.
Yeah, it's well worth listening to. I heard it at the time. So
yeah.
Again, on behalf of the group and behalf of Gilly, thank you so much for spending
Absolutely welcome.
evening with us, and the evening or the afternoon we had back in the springtime. And I hope that the group will be able to arrange another visit to come and see some more of the collection, hopefully when
you would be very welcome. Yeah.
We'll be back.
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And thank you again to our audience for joining us this evening, and look out for future talks in this series looking at other photographic collections around the UK and elsewhere. Thank you, Anne, thank you, Gilly, and thanks to our audience, and good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.